Deep down, many of us know that there are people in our lives who only want to be around us if we're being vulnerable, who only care about hearing our problems, and who somehow make us feel like we're a better version of ourselves when we're with them. But what if I told you that this kind of behavior isn't a sign of genuine interest, but rather a carefully crafted tactic to keep us hooked on their validation? I know this sounds harsh, but think back to that friend or lover who seemed so supportive and understanding at first, only to slowly start to drain your energy and turn your life's ups and downs into a never-ending source of emotional fuel for their own purposes. In this video, we're going to delve into the unseen web of emotional dependence and explore how people use validation to control and manipulate others, revealing a dark side of human psychology that's rarely discussed, but all too familiar. When we seek validation from others, we're not just looking for affirmation, we're actually attempting to fill a void within ourselves, often stemming from deep-seated insecurities and a lack of self-worth. This insatiable need for validation can be a powerful tool for those who wish to manipulate others, as it creates a sense of dependence that can be exploited for their own gain. In a relationship, this kind of validation can become a toxic form of emotional currency, where one person holds the power to make the other feel seen and valued, effectively creating a sense of control over the other's emotions and actions. But what's truly fascinating is that this desire for validation isn't just about seeking love and acceptance. It's often about avoiding rejection and fear of abandonment, which can be a crippling motivator for those who are desperate to feel worthy and valued. When we're too invested in receiving validation from others, we begin to surrender our own sense of identity and autonomy, becoming dependent on external sources for a sense of self-worth that should be coming from within. And here's the most insidious part: the more we crave validation, the more we're actually reinforcing the very insecurities and fears that are driving our need for it, creating a vicious cycle of self-deception and dependence that's incredibly difficult to break free from. We often overlook the profound influence of validation on the dynamics of power in relationships. Yet it's precisely this subtle yet potent force that can manipulate and control others, often beneath our conscious awareness. When individuals crave validation, they are attempting to soothe the nagging insecurities that plague their ego, and in doing so, they become susceptible to the whims of those who possess the power to provide that validation. The desire for validation is at the heart of many a toxic relationship, where one person uses their influence to garner feelings of importance and self-worth, often at the expense of the other's emotional well-being. In these situations, the dynamics at play can be insidious, with the individual seeking validation often trapped in a cycle of self-deception, unable to recognize the true nature of their motivations and the manipulative tactics being employed by their partner. The pursuit of validation can also be a clever guise for a more sinister intent: control, as those who crave it will often go to great lengths to maintain a false narrative, all in the effort to avoid feelings of abandonment or rejection. We'd do well to recognize that validation is not the same as genuine connection or intimacy, and those who prioritize the former over the latter are ultimately sacrificing their autonomy and emotional resilience on the altar of a fragile ego. When we give others validation based on their insecurities, we're often unaware that we're inadvertently perpetuating a toxic dynamic, one where their emotional well-being becomes inextricably linked to our approval. Validation is not just a positive reinforcement, it's a currency of dependence, one that can be used to manipulate others into conforming to our expectations or maintaining a relationship that no longer serves them. People may be attracted to those who constantly validate them because it fills a void left by their own lack of self-love, creating a feedback loop where the external validation becomes the primary source of self-worth. Behind the facade of caring and concern, some individuals use validation as a subtle form of control, making others feel powerless in the face of their emotions, and reinforcing a cycle of people-pleasing and codependency. When we seek validation from others to the point of sacrificing our own self-respect, we're often unaware that we're trading our autonomy for a temporary ego boost. And it's exactly this temporary high that makes us dependent on the validation of others. We must recognize that true validation comes from within, and that our self-worth shouldn't be tied to external opinions or expectations. For it's only when we're not desperate for validation that we can begin to see the unseen web of emotional dependence that's been manipulating us all along. When we seek validation from others, it's often because we're trying to fill a void within ourselves that we're afraid to confront, rather than addressing the root causes of our own insecurities. The pursuit of emotional validation can be a thin veil for a more primal desire to control and manipulate others, often rooted in a deep-seated fear of abandonment. People who crave validation may do so because they've become accustomed to using their emotions as a means of attraction, leveraging vulnerability to elicit a response from others that reinforces their own self-worth. Emotional support can easily tip into psychological abuse when the lines between healthy nurturing and unhealthy control are blurred, often perpetuated by individuals who struggle with their own insecurities and the need for validation. The irony is that those who seek validation through emotional manipulation often do so because they are desperate to feel seen and heard, yet in reality, their actions serve only to reinforce their own feelings of powerlessness and isolation. At its core, emotional dependence on others often stems from a fundamental lack of self-awareness, leaving individuals crippled by a perpetual need for external validation, which in turn fuels a vicious cycle of control, manipulation, and self-deception that's near impossible to break free from. As we delve into the mechanisms of emotional dependence, we must acknowledge that what drives individuals to control and manipulate others is often rooted in a deep-seated need for validation, a desperate cry for self-worth in a world that can be cruel and unforgiving. People may pretend to be interested in our problems, to listen to our fears and our dreams, but make no mistake, their true intentions are often driven by an insatiable hunger for power, a need to manipulate and control in order to feel secure in their own lives. This craving for validation can take on many forms, from insincere flattery to outright emotional extortion, and it's essential to recognize the difference between genuine interest and calculated manipulation. For the former comes from a place of genuine connection, while the latter is a thinly veiled attempt to assert dominance. When we find ourselves gravitating towards people who consistently disregard our boundaries or drain our energy, it's often a sign that we're seeking a sense of validation through their approval, and it's crucial to take a step back and reevaluate why we're allowing ourselves to be treated this way. At its core, emotional dependence is a manifestation of our own insecurities, a desperate attempt to fill the void within ourselves by seeking external validation, rather than cultivating self-love and self-acceptance. By understanding the complex web of motivations and emotions that drive emotional dependence, we can begin to break free from its suffocating grip, and instead, forge deeper connections with others that are based on mutual respect, trust, and genuine interest. As we part ways, take a moment to recognize the invisible strings of emotional dependence that may be pulling at the people around you. Ask yourself, have you ever felt the need to constantly seek validation from others in order to feel whole? I encourage you to like this video, share your observations in the comments below, and by subscribing, you'll stay up to date on more in-depth explorations of human behavior and psychology.